The clock struck midnight, casting a heavy silence over David's small bedroom. Moonlight filtered through the curtains, creating intricate patterns on the walls. David lay in bed, tossing and turning, unable to shake off the growing unease that had gripped him for the past few nights. His dreams had become increasingly vivid and terrifying, blurring the lines between reality and nightmare. Each night, he found himself in the same decaying mansion, chased by shadowy figures whose faces he could never quite make out. David had always been a sound sleeper, someone who could rest peacefully through the night without interruptions. But recently, his sleep had been plagued by these relentless nightmares. It started subtly, a feeling of being watched, an inexplicable coldness that seeped into his bones. But soon, the dreams escalated, pulling him into a world of horror that felt all too real. As his eyes fluttered shut, David felt himself being pulled into the familiar darkness of sleep. This time, the transition was smoother, almost as if the mansion was eagerly awaiting his arrival. He stood in the mansion's grand hallway, the air thick with the scent of mildew and decay. The walls were adorned with faded portraits of stern-looking ancestors, their eyes seemingly following his every move. The floorboards creaked ominously beneath his feet as he walked, the silence broken only by his own rapid breathing. David's steps were hesitant, each one echoing through the vast hall. He had explored the mansion in his dreams many times, yet it always seemed to change, the layout morphing into something new and more sinister with each visit. Tonight, the atmosphere felt especially oppressive, as if the walls themselves were closing in on him. The portraits on the walls seemed more lifelike, their gazes penetrating, judging. He walked past a room he had seen before, its door slightly ajar. Inside, the remnants of a once grand dining table lay in disarray. The chairs were overturned, and the chandelier hung precariously, a few crystals missing. David paused, a sense of dread washing over him as he peered inside. It was as if the room held memories of a long-forgotten tragedy, an event that had left a permanent scar on the mansion. David shook his head, trying to dispel the thoughts. He continued down the hallway, his heart pounding in his chest. The air grew colder, and a strange, almost ethereal mist began to creep along the floor. He knew what was coming. He had experienced it countless times before. Yet the fear was no less real. Suddenly, a cold hand grasped his shoulder. He spun around, but there was no one there. The shadows seemed to dance and twist, whispering his name. Panic set in as he stumbled through the hallways, desperately trying to find an exit. The mansion seemed to stretch endlessly, each door leading to another room of horrors. As he ran, David could hear distant echoes of laughter, twisted and mocking. The sound sent chills down his spine. The shadowy figures that chased him were never fully visible, always lurking just out of sight. Their presence was palpable, a dark force that suffocated him with fear. David's heart pounded as he reached the top of a grand staircase. A woman in a tattered white dress stood at the bottom, her hair hanging limply over her face. She raised her head slowly, revealing hollow eyes and a twisted grin. "You can't escape," she whispered, her voice echoing through the mansion. He bolted down the stairs, his footsteps echoing like a drumbeat. The woman followed, her movements unnaturally smooth and swift. David reached the front door and yanked it open, only to find himself back in the grand hallway. Despair washed over him as he realized there was no way out. In a last-ditch effort, he ran to the mansion's library, where a massive ancient tome lay open on a dusty table. The pages were filled with cryptic symbols and strange incantations. David's eyes locked onto a single line that seemed to glow with an otherworldly light. "To break the curse, face the truth within," it read. With no other options, David closed his eyes and whispered the incantation. The shadows swirled around him, and he felt a sudden jolt. He was back in his bed, drenched in sweat, his heart still racing. He glanced at the clock. It was 12:01 a.m. Just 1 minute had passed. Shaken but determined, David knew what he had to do. He visited the town's library and delved into the history of the mansion, uncovering a tragic tale of betrayal and murder that had cursed its inhabitants. The woman in the white dress was the mansion's former owner, killed by her husband in a fit of jealousy. Her restless spirit had been trapping others in their nightmares, reliving her torment. Armed with this knowledge, David returned to the mansion in his dreams, this time prepared to confront the spirit. He found her in the grand hallway, her hollow eyes filled with sorrow. "I'm here to help you," he said softly. "You don't have to suffer anymore." The woman's twisted grin softened, and she began to weep. As her tears fell, the mansion around them began to crumble, the shadows dissipating. She whispered a heartfelt thank you before fading away, finally free from her torment. David awoke with a sense of peace, the curse broken. The nightmares never returned, but the memory of that haunted mansion and its tragic story stayed with him. And as he drifted off to sleep each night, he couldn't help but wonder, what other secrets lay hidden in the darkest corners of his dreams? David's days became a battle against his own mind. The mansion in his dreams had left a mark on him, a haunting presence that lingered even in the waking world. Each night, as sleep approached, he felt a mixture of dread and determination. He knew he had to return to the mansion, to confront whatever horrors awaited him. The clock struck midnight, and David's eyes grew heavy. He fought against the pull of sleep, but it was a losing battle. The darkness enveloped him, and he found himself once again in the mansion's grand hallway. The air was colder this time, the shadows deeper. The portraits on the walls seemed more lifelike, their eyes filled with a malevolent intelligence. David took a deep breath and steeled himself. He would not let fear control him. He walked with purpose, his footsteps echoing through the empty halls. He could feel the presence of the shadowy figures, watching him, waiting for him to falter. As he turned a corner, he saw a door slightly ajar. The room beyond was bathed in an eerie blue light. David approached cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was empty, save for a single massive mirror on the far wall. The surface of the mirror was cracked and dirty, but it seemed to pulse with a strange, otherworldly energy. David's reflection stared back at him, his eyes wide with fear and determination. He approached the mirror, his breath fogging the surface. As he reached out to touch it, the image in the mirror shifted. The reflection was no longer his own. Instead, it was the woman in the white dress, her hollow eyes staring into his soul. "You can't escape," she whispered, her voice echoing in his mind. "You belong to the mansion now." David recoiled, his heart racing. He backed away from the mirror, his mind racing. He had to find a way out, to break free from the nightmare. But how? As he turned to leave the room, the door slammed shut, trapping him inside. The mirror began to glow with an intense light, and the woman's voice filled the room. "Face the truth within," she whispered. "Only then can you break the curse." David closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He had to confront his fears, to face the truth that lay hidden within the mansion. He turned back to the mirror and forced himself to look into the woman's hollow eyes. "Tell me what I need to do," he said, his voice trembling. "Tell me how to break the curse." The woman's expression softened, and she began to weep. "You must find the source of the curse," she said, "the place where it all began. Only then can you free yourself." David nodded, determination flooding his veins. He would find the source of the curse and put an end to the nightmare once and for all. He turned away from the mirror and walked to the door, which creaked open as he approached. The hallway beyond was darker than before, the shadows thicker. David steeled himself and stepped into the darkness, his heart pounding with each step. He would not let fear control him. He would find the source of the curse and break free from the mansion's grip. David's journey through the mansion was fraught with danger and terror. The shadowy figures that had haunted him from the beginning seemed more aggressive now, their whispers more insistent. They taunted him, reminding him of his fear and despair. But David pressed on, determined to find the source of the curse. As he wandered through the darkened halls, he began to notice a pattern. The rooms seemed to lead him in a specific direction, guiding him deeper into the mansion. Each step he took felt heavier, as if the weight of the mansion's history pressed down on him. The air grew colder, and the walls seemed to close in, making it harder to breathe. David's mind raced with thoughts of the mansion's past. What had happened here? What tragedy had left such a dark stain on this place? He knew he needed to uncover the truth to break the curse. The ancient tome in the library had hinted at a source, a beginning. He just had to find it. As he turned a corner, he saw a door he hadn't noticed before. It was slightly ajar, a faint light seeping through the crack. David approached cautiously, his heart pounding. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was unlike any other in the mansion. It was small and dimly lit, the walls lined with old books and trinkets. A single massive mirror stood in the center, its surface cracked and dirty. David's reflection stared back at him, his eyes wide with fear and determination. He approached the mirror, his breath fogging the surface. As he reached out to touch it, the image in the mirror shifted. The reflection was no longer his own. Instead, it was the woman in the white dress, her hollow eyes staring into his soul. "You can't escape," she whispered, her voice echoing in his mind. "You belong to the mansion now." David recoiled, his heart racing. He backed away from the mirror, his mind racing. He had to find a way out, to break free from the nightmare. But how? As he turned to leave the room, the door slammed shut, trapping him inside. The mirror began to glow with an intense light, and the woman's voice filled the room. "Face the truth within," she whispered. "Only then can you break the curse." David closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He had to confront his fears, to face the truth that lay hidden within the mansion. He turned back to the mirror and forced himself to look into the woman's hollow eyes. "Tell me what I need to do," he said, his voice trembling. "Tell me how to break the curse." The woman's expression softened and she began to weep. "You must find the source of the curse," she said, "the place where it all began. Only then can you free yourself." David nodded, determination flooding his veins. He would find the source of the curse and put an end to the nightmare once and for all. He turned away from the mirror and walked to the door, which creaked open as he approached. The hallway beyond was darker than before, the shadows thicker. David steeled himself and stepped into the darkness, his heart pounding with each step. He would not let fear control him. He would find the source of the curse and break free from the mansion's grip. As he wandered through the darkened halls, the whispers grew louder. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, filling his mind with fear and doubt. But David pressed on, determined to find the source of the curse. Eventually, he reached a door at the end of a long, narrow hallway. It was old and weathered. The wood cracked and splintered. David hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and pushed it open. The room beyond was a stark contrast to the rest of the mansion. It was brightly lit, the walls adorned with vibrant paintings and tapestries. A large, ornate bed stood in the center, its linens pristine and untouched. It was as if the room had been frozen in time, untouched by the decay that plagued the rest of the mansion. David approached the bed cautiously, his heart pounding. As he got closer, he noticed a small, intricately carved box on the bedside table. It seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, drawing him in. He reached out and opened the box, revealing a small, delicate locket inside. The locket was old and tarnished, but it seemed to glow with a soft, ethereal light. David picked it up and felt a strange sense of familiarity wash over him. As he held the locket, memories flooded his mind. He saw visions of the mansion's past, of the woman in the white dress and her tragic story. She had been the mansion's owner, a kind and gentle soul who had been betrayed by her husband in a fit of jealousy. Her spirit had been trapped in the mansion, reliving her torment over and over again. David realized that the locket was the key to breaking the curse. It held the woman's spirit, bound to the mansion by the weight of her sorrow and despair. He knew what he had to do. He held the locket close and whispered a prayer for the woman's soul, asking for her forgiveness and release. The room grew colder, and the light from the locket grew brighter. The shadows that had haunted him began to dissipate, and the woman's voice filled the room one last time. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude and relief. "You have freed me from my torment. The curse is broken." David felt a sense of peace wash over him as the room returned to its former brightness. The locket's light faded, and the mansion around him seemed to shift and change. The walls straightened, the decay vanished, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. He knew that the curse had been lifted, and the mansion was no longer a place of horror and despair. The woman's spirit was finally at rest, and the nightmares that had plagued him were gone. David awoke with a sense of peace, the curse broken. The nightmares never returned, but the memory of that haunted mansion and its tragic story stayed with him. And as he drifted off to sleep each night, he couldn't help but wonder, what other secrets lay hidden in the darkest corners of his dreams? Sleep well, and remember, sometimes the only way to escape a nightmare is to face it head-on. Sweet dreams. if you dare." David's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the tragic scene unfold in the mirror. The woman's torment was palpable, her agony etched into the very fabric of the mansion. The realization that her husband had cursed her, binding her spirit to the mansion for all eternity, filled David with a sense of urgency. He had to find a way to break the curse and free her soul. As he stood before the mirror, the woman's spirit seemed to shimmer and shift, her sorrowful eyes meeting his. "Thank you for your willingness to help," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "To break the curse, you must confront the one who bound me here." David nodded, determination flooding his veins. "I will do whatever it takes to set you free," he replied, his voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at him. "Where can I find him?" The woman's eyes flickered with a mixture of hope and fear. "He resides in the deepest part of the mansion, a place of darkness and despair. Be cautious, for he is powerful, and will not give up his hold on me easily." With those words, the woman began to fade, her form becoming insubstantial. David took a deep breath and steeled himself for the confrontation ahead. He turned away from the mirror and made his way down the narrow hallway, his steps echoing in the oppressive silence. The mansion seemed to react to his determination, the shadows growing darker and more menacing. The air grew colder, and a sense of foreboding settled over him like a shroud. David could feel the presence of the shadowy figures, their whispers growing louder and more insistent. They seemed to be trying to deter him, to sow doubt and fear in his mind. "You can't defeat him," they hissed. "You belong to the mansion now. Give up and accept your fate." David clenched his fists and pressed on, refusing to be swayed by their words. He followed the twisting hallways and winding staircases, each step bringing him closer to the heart of the mansion. The atmosphere grew heavier, the darkness closing in around him like a suffocating blanket. Eventually, he reached a massive, ornate door at the end of a long corridor. It was intricately carved with symbols and figures that seemed to writhe and twist in the flickering candlelight. David hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The room beyond was vast and dimly lit, the air thick with an oppressive energy. At the center of the room stood a figure, tall and imposing, his back turned to David. The figure radiated an aura of malevolence, a darkness that seemed to seep into the very walls of the mansion. David stepped forward, his heart pounding. "I know what you did," he said, his voice echoing in the silence. "You cursed her, bound her spirit to this mansion. I'm here to break that curse." The figure turned slowly, revealing a face twisted with anger and hatred. It was the woman's husband, the man who had cursed her all those years ago. His eyes burned with a fierce intensity, and his lips curled into a sneer. "You think you can challenge me?" he spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "I am the master of this mansion. Her spirit belongs to me, and so do you." David took a step back, his resolve wavering for a moment. But then he remembered the woman's sorrowful eyes, her plea for help. He couldn't back down now. He had to confront this man and break the curse. "I will do whatever it takes to set her free," David said, his voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at him. "I will not let you continue to torment her." The man's eyes blazed with fury. "You are a fool," he snarled. "You have no idea what you are dealing with." With a wave of his hand, the man summoned a swirling vortex of darkness that engulfed the room. The shadows twisted and writhed, forming dark figures that lunged at David. He braced himself, feeling the cold touch of the shadows as they tried to pull him into the abyss. But David fought back, summoning every ounce of his strength and determination. He remembered the woman's words, the promise he had made to set her free. He couldn't give up now. With a fierce resolve, David pushed through the darkness, his eyes fixed on the man at the center of the room. He could feel the malevolent energy radiating from him, but he refused to be cowed. As he approached, the man's expression shifted from anger to something else, a flicker of fear, perhaps, or recognition. David reached out and grasped the man's arm, feeling a surge of energy course through him. "You will release her," David demanded, his voice filled with authority. "You have no right to hold her here." The man snarled and tried to pull away, but David held fast. He could feel the energy shifting, the darkness beginning to recede. He focused all his willpower on the task at hand, determined to break the curse. Finally, with a great effort, David tore the man's grip from the woman's spirit. The darkness that had filled the room dissipated, leaving behind a sense of clarity and light. The man fell to his knees, his power broken. David turned to the woman's spirit, which shimmered and glowed with a newfound radiance. Her eyes were filled with gratitude and relief. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "You have freed me from my torment. The curse is broken." David felt a sense of peace wash over him as the woman's spirit began to fade. The mansion around him seemed to shift and change, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. The walls straightened, the decay vanished, and the air grew warmer. He knew that the curse had been lifted, and the mansion was no longer a place of horror and despair. The woman's spirit was finally at rest, and the nightmares that had plagued him were gone. David awoke with a sense of peace, the curse broken. The nightmares never returned, but the memory of that haunted mansion and its tragic story stayed with him. And as he drifted off to sleep each night, he couldn't help but wonder what other secrets lay hidden in the darkest corners of his dreams. Sleep well, and remember, sometimes the only way to escape a nightmare is to face it head on. Sweet dreams, if you dare. The world outside was beginning to awaken, and the first light of dawn filtered through the curtains as David lay in bed, reflecting on the events of the night. He could still feel the residual tension in his muscles, the echoes of the confrontation with the malevolent spirit lingering in his mind. But alongside the remnants of fear, there was a profound sense of peace and resolution. He had done it. He had freed the woman from her torment and broken the curse that had plagued her for centuries. As the morning light grew stronger, David rose from his bed, feeling a newfound energy and clarity. He made his way to the kitchen, where he prepared a cup of coffee, the rich aroma filling the air. He sat at the small table by the window, looking out at the world with a sense of renewed purpose. The mansion's dark influence had been lifted, and for the first time in weeks, he felt truly at ease. David's thoughts turned to the woman's spirit, and he wondered if she had found the peace she so desperately sought. He hoped that she was finally able to rest, free from the anguish and sorrow that had bound her to the mansion. He knew that the experience had changed him, leaving an indelible mark on his soul. He had faced his fears, confronted the darkness, and emerged stronger for it. As the days passed, David's life began to return to a semblance of normalcy. He went about his daily routines, but there was a noticeable shift in his demeanor. He carried himself with a quiet confidence, a sense of inner strength that hadn't been there before. The nightmares that had once tormented him were gone, replaced by dreams that were filled with light and hope. One afternoon, David decided to visit the local library, the place where he had first begun his journey to uncover the mansion's secrets. As he walked through the familiar aisles, he found himself drawn to the section on local history. He pulled a dusty old book from the shelf, its pages yellowed with age, and began to read. The book contained stories of the mansion's past, tales of its former inhabitants, and the events that had shaped its history. David read about the woman's life before the curse, her kindness and generosity, and the love she had shared with her husband before jealousy had torn them apart. The pages detailed the tragic events that had led to her death and the curse that had bound her spirit to the mansion. As he read, David felt a deep connection to the woman's story. He realized that her spirit had been reaching out to him, guiding him to uncover the truth and set her free. He felt a sense of gratitude for the experience, despite the fear and uncertainty it had caused. It had given him a new perspective on life, a reminder of the strength that lay within him. David closed the book and made his way to the librarian's desk. He asked if there were any other records or documents related to the mansion's history, hoping to learn more about the woman's life and the events that had transpired. The librarian, an elderly woman with kind eyes, smiled and nodded. "There are a few more documents in the archives," she said, leading him to a small room at the back of the library. "Not many people are interested in the old mansion's history, but I'm glad to see someone taking an interest." David spent hours poring over the documents, piecing together the story of the mansion and its inhabitants. He learned about the woman's early life, her hopes and dreams, and the love she had shared with her husband before jealousy had poisoned their relationship. He read about the tragic events that had led to her death and the curse that had bound her spirit to the mansion. As the sun began to set, David felt a sense of closure. He had uncovered the full story, and he understood the depth of the woman's suffering and the strength of her spirit. He felt a deep respect for her resilience and her ability to endure despite the torment she had faced. David left the library and made his way to the mansion one last time. He stood outside its gates, looking at the grand structure that had once been a place of horror and despair. Now, it stood as a testament to the woman's strength and the power of the human spirit to overcome even the darkest of trials. He took a deep breath and whispered a silent prayer for the woman's soul, thanking her for the lessons she had taught him. As he turned to leave, he felt a gentle breeze brush against his cheek, and he knew that she was finally at peace. David returned home, carrying the memories of the mansion and its tragic story with him. The experience had changed him, leaving an indelible mark on his soul. He had faced his fears, confronted the darkness, and emerged stronger for it. As the years passed, David often found himself reflecting on the events of that fateful night. He shared the story with others, hoping to inspire them with the lessons he had learned. He spoke of the woman's strength and resilience, her ability to endure despite the torment she had faced, and the power of the human spirit to overcome even the darkest of trials. David's life was filled with new adventures and experiences, each one building on the strength and confidence he had gained from his encounter with the mansion. He traveled to new places, met new people, and faced new challenges with a sense of determination and purpose. And yet, no matter where life took him, the memory of the mansion and the woman's spirit stayed with him. It was a reminder of the strength that lay within him, the power to face his fears and overcome the darkness. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the capacity for growth and change. As he grew older, David often found himself returning to the library, reading and researching stories of the supernatural and the unknown. He felt a deep connection to these tales, a sense of kinship with those who had faced their own demons and emerged stronger for it. One evening, as he sat by the fireplace reading a particularly gripping tale of a haunted house, he felt a familiar presence. It was the woman's spirit, her presence a comforting warmth that filled the room. David smiled, knowing that she was watching over him, a guardian spirit that had found peace and purpose. He closed the book and gazed into the flickering flames, feeling a sense of contentment and fulfillment. He had faced his fears, confronted the darkness, and emerged stronger for it. He had freed the woman's spirit and broken the curse that had bound her. And in doing so, he had discovered the strength that lay within himself. David's journey had been one of fear and uncertainty, but it had also been one of growth and transformation. He had learned that sometimes, the only way to escape a nightmare was to face it head-on. And as he drifted off to sleep each night, he knew that he was capable of facing whatever challenges life might bring. Sleep well, and remember, sometimes the only way to escape a nightmare is to face it head-on. Sweet dreams.